conventions and treaties that have involved transboundary marine resources. So what is a transboundary marine resource? Let's start with the basics. As we've already said, UNCLOS recognizes sovereignty and sovereign rights in natural resources, and transboundary resources straddle two or more political boundaries. The boundaries can be adjacent or opposite, and I chose this image first because it has Norway in it, and secondly because it shows a couple of kinds of transboundary issues. So, for example, Norway and the UK have a transboundary line right here that are opposite. That's an opposite line. But then with Russia, it's an adjacent. And so what's interesting for marine resources is I don't think there are 400 nautical miles between Norway and the United Kingdom. And so neither country will get its full exclusive economic zone, right? So countries can decide how to delimit this, and it looks like this is pretty much equidistant, this line. But neither side, each one will probably get definitely get the 12 nautical mile territorial sea, but will not get the full extent of the 200 mile exclusive economic zone. However, when the boundary line is adjacent, it can go out, all the way to the area, or whatever we're going to call the area is beyond national jurisdiction. And so each side will get, the 12 nautical mile, the 200 nautical mile EEZ, and the issue is where do they draw that line? And so the transboundary resources can be non-living, such as, the oil resources up here in the North Sea, but it can also involve fisheries. So it can be living and non-living. For our purposes, we're going to consider it, although water is the source of life, it's non-living. So it'll be a non-living resource. So offshore freshened groundwater and offshore hydrocarbons are both fluid. And I say that, and they can be mobile. I say here they're contained only because offshore freshened groundwater is beneath the ocean. However, as we've been discussing, some of the resources are connected to land, which means it's not fully contained, but within the marine area, it is contained. So how do these resources get developed? Sovereigns exercise their rights, but they have to respect each other. But what's interesting, and as I'll show later, boundary delimitation is not necessary in order to reach an agreement on exploitation of natural resources. The treaty that started it all was the 1976 Frigg Treaty between Norway and the UK, which produced the standard provisions for shared natural resources in the marine environment. States appoint a concessionaire, and that appoints a single operator to make exploitation more efficient and cheaper. They agree on the limits of the field and their proportionate shares of the resource. They cooperate on safety and maintain their own tax regimes. They must approve any transfer of the rights to another party or any addition of rights. The landing facilities, in other words, the operating rigs, are freely accessible to both sides. And they can establish a dedicated commission, which some of them have done. The straddling clause, which is the clause that includes the transboundary resources, requires cooperation and development of the shared minerals, and that is now in most of the delimitation agreements that say here's where the boundary is. But is that opinio juris for all shared resources? One would probably say not. The practice may be widespread in the oil and gas industry, but it hasn't been accepted widely elsewhere. And I included this image, first of all, because it's Norway again, and also to show how many parties have an interest in these gas fields. And I got my PhD in Scotland, in Glasgow, as they were discussing Scottish independence. And they were saying, well, we don't need England for our financial security, because look at all this oil is just off of our shore. And the independence vote failed, but that's what they were counting So I think this is really interesting. So this is natural gas in the orange, and this is oil. And Eduardo, I'm sure you could speak at length about these shared natural resources because you are the resident expert, but you'll get your chance in just a minute. Okay, so I thought it might be interesting to list the number of treaties, and there really is just a handful. So the first one was Ems-Dollard, and these are the treaties that include all natural resources. And so one could argue that these treaties would include offshore freshened groundwater, that of course would only apply to these particular parties. So the Ems-Dollard Treaty between Germany and Netherlands says all solid, liquid, or gaseous underground substances. So that would definitely include offshore freshened groundwater. The France-Spain Bay of Biscay Treaty says equal distribution of natural resources, which is broad enough to include offshore freshened groundwater. The Saudi Arabia-Sudan Treaty, non-living substances, and then they said, just in case there's any doubt, including hydrocarbons. And notice 1974, there were a number of these treaties that were entered into in 1974. Pop quiz, does anyone remember what happened in 1974, those of you who are alive?
Oil shock.
Exactly. Yep. So that's why these treaties became so important for nations like, wait, we're going to need more oil, so I don't care if we decide where our boundaries are, let's just get in there and develop. The 1990 Malaysia-Thailand Treaty, and that established a joint authority, and it also it addresses all non-living natural resources of the seabed and subsoil, offshore freshened groundwater for sure. The Jamaica-Columbia Agreement, and maybe you know about this one, Margarita, which is living and non-living resources. So notice that the definitions are different in each case. The Oman-Pakistan Muscat Agreement, any geological, petroleum structure, individual oil or gas field, mineral, or other natural resources that cross the delimitation line. Barbados and Guyana, living and non-living natural resources. Oman, Yemen, both natural resources, both living and non-living, of the seabed, subsoil, and super-adjacent waters. So that would include fish, I guess. And then the Seychelles-Mauritius Treaty, and that's a joint development agreement that includes mineral, petroleum, or other non-living resources of the seabed. So one could say that that would also include offshore freshened groundwater. But really, you know, there aren't that many that would automatically include offshore freshened groundwater, which means for other transboundary offshore freshened groundwater resources, nations would have to enter into other agreements in order to develop it. And then I thought it might be interesting to include the treaties that address hydrocarbons. And so you can see another 1974 agreement between Japan and South Korea, also as a result of the oil shock. Then Senegal and Guinea-Bissau, mineral and petroleum resources, and petroleum is crude oil and natural gas. Nigeria, Sao Tome and Principe Treaty, and that's a JDA. Australia and Timor-Leste Treaty. Norway and Russia, so you reached an agreement on unitization of hydrocarbons. U.S. and Mexico, geological hydrocarbon structures and reservoirs. And then very recently, the Angola Democratic Republic of the Congo, JDA. So that was just last year. Now, not all of the agreements have delimitation, but some of them do. So this is a list of the agreements for natural resources, both all natural resources and hydrocarbons, that also agree on the delimitation, on the boundaries between the nations. So you can see the list here. And then there are all of these treaties that reached agreement on joint exploitation of natural resources, but without delimiting the boundaries. And going back through some of these agreements, there's some of them that are only for 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, and they're coming up for renewal. And so the question is, what happens when they come up for renewal? Will they be renewed as they are? Will they now include other resources, such as, a broader term? Yeah. So we'll see. So when developing transboundary offshore freshened groundwater, not all of the development will be transboundary. That's obvious because some of them will be in domestic waters. Some treaties already include offshore freshened groundwater, as we just saw. Will, or even should, offshore freshened groundwater be added to joint development agreements? Or will they have separate agreements? And if they do have separate agreements, then what provisions should be included for transboundary offshore freshened groundwater? This is a map. It's the same questions. I wonder why there was a big blank space. And so this is a map of the offshore freshened groundwater that has been already discovered. And I included methane hydrates because when they break down, I don't know if you're aware of them, but they exist under a very particular set of circumstances, high pressure, low temperature, and it consists of natural gas and water. And so when the methane hydrates dissociate, right now water is viewed as a disposable byproduct. It was Mark Person who said, well, you know what, maybe it's not so disposable, maybe we could use that for offshore oil and gas development, which needs water. But that is another source of offshore freshened groundwater. It's not buried because methane hydrates, sort of they exist sort of on their own on the seafloor surface. But still, I think that's an interesting question. And that is the end of my presentation.